There's a million different research topics in my pile, yet I find myself pulled back to the depths time and time again. From a gameplay perspective, many people have voiced that they feel that it's very, very dry and not a whole lot of fun. I think that the environment art, and as an extension of that, the environmental storytelling tells a different story entirely, and I want to share that with you today. So let's look at the abject horror of Hylia's basement. Why I also think there's games of Tears of the Kingdom Masterworks. Something that I stumbled on that I found really, really interesting was a review of the different flora that is in the depths. And after coming away from that and reading it, I'm not really sure that all of them qualify as flora anymore. I think some of them might possibly be flora and fauna. The page in question is talking about what are known as the Hydra trees down in the depths. I originally started researching these because of an interesting fact about the Forgotten Temple and where it lives. The Forgotten Temple sits in a place that is called Kukuja Valley, and Kukuja Valley is an anagram of Kujaku, which is peahen, and I've always assumed that this is a reference to Hylia of some kind. I know a lot of people feel that the Seal Temple remains there. I'm not here to say whether I think you're right or wrong, but I was researching something related to that. And that's how I ended up stumbling onto an entry about the Hydra trees that are in the depths. The Hydra trees are actually, there is a real plant called a Hydra tree, but one of the notes that they have on the concept art for it is in reference to the Hydra genus, which is an organism. In some ways, I almost wish I had never dug any deeper on this because it's kind of horrifying. And so naturally, I did the most best thing that I could think of, and I'm packing up all of that horrific research and sharing it with all of you. Let's take a quick look here. This is what the Hydrazoa looks like, the organism. You can probably immediately see the resemblance to the Hydra tree. I'm very, very positive that this is, of course, a one-to-one inspiration for this tree, but the trees themselves actually exhibit some really, really interesting behaviors that seem to match up to the Hydrazoa, and I find that really fascinating. The Hydrazoa itself actually has quite a few, I guess we'll say, features, and some of those are things like it can repair its own DNA nearly indefinitely. It can also repair its DNA by incorporating DNA from prey. In non-harsh times, it can reproduce sexually. If it is dealing with an abundance or a lack of either partners or nutrients, it can reproduce asexually as well. If they're damaged, they can fossilize their exterior to protect themselves. Damaged sites develop into new branches. They spread spores to paralyze their attackers. And in the case of the asexual reproduction notes, they can actually develop their own womb, so they can carry their own child that way. That's like how the mechanism for their asexual reproduction. So if we stop and actually compare those to the Hydra trees that are in the depths, we can see some really, really interesting things about this. One of them is, aside from the shape, is that if you cut one of these trees down and look at the cross-section, there's an interesting speckling pattern. And many people have noticed that the speckling pattern seems to look a lot like what you see on the gyptopods. In addition to that, one of the ways that a Hydrazoa can actually regenerate, it's say it has a limb slice off, and then it fossilizes, and then it can regenerate a new limb. Those new limbs they look like polyps at first. And if you look at the things that are always surrounding these trees in the depths, there are these polyp-like structures. It's really, really interesting. Some of the trees even have polyps growing out of them as if they're growing new branches. And then this actually extends beyond the tree as well. If you look at what happens when you attack a gibdo, they actually make a hardened shell-looking thing on the outside, and they're very, very prone to damage at that point. So we have two things that are now working here. The way in which the Hydrazoa evolves, repairs itself, and half a dozen other things that it seems to be able to do is through an intense amount of potassium consumption. And the number one source of potassium in that world seems to be bananas, which the Yiga are obsessed with. And if you notice, the Yiga live next to a giant hole that goes to the depths. I'm still researching that, but it's kind of freaky, to be honest with you. Sorry. Just thinking about the implications of it, this scrambles my brain sometimes. I wish I could say that the similarities stop there, but unfortunately, there's even more. If you look at the top-down view of Queen Gibdo, there are a couple things to note here. One of them is the fingers on, I guess you would say, I don't really know what they are, honestly, at this point. Of course, they look like very skeletal fingers like you'd see on a human hand, but you may notice that even on their fingers and their arms, there are splits upon splits. They keep splitting for quite a bit. And then if you look at the way that the shape of the arms and how they have this sort of like flared, I guess you might almost say like a weird spinal column type of look to them. This is actually a structure that we can see reflected on the Hydra trees in the depths, and another place that I'm gonna save for later. This isn't the only time that something like this actually appears. There is another game in the series that has structures like this, where whenever you damage their arm, the recovery of their arms actually form these polyp-like structures that are found on the Hydra trees. Pseudo found a Gibdo and Queen Gibdo as well. And that is Null from Echoes of Wisdom. So let's take a look at Null. On Null's arm here, you can see a similar shape anyway on the 3 barbs or figures or whatever the shit it is. I don't honestly know. And then if you damage Null's arm when he's trying to regenerate it, you can see this like polyp that kind of comes out and reforms it, which it's eerily similar to exactly what the Hydrazoa looks like when it's damaged. We've seen something like this before elsewhere too. In the Minish Cap, when Vati becomes transfigured, one of the things that we see is this like tri-barbed sort of like hand thing as well. That's very similar to Null. I have a lot of research about that. It deserves some topics. I'm going to make sure to share that to some of the connections between Null and Vati and whatnot. But you can see a similar thing going on with these transfigured forms of Vati as well, which is really, really also fascinating, because it makes me start to form this opinion that whatever this organism is in the depths is either it is something about Null that's leaking out into the depths and now into the surface, or it is a part of the reason why there's this sort of evil that's trying to spread itself to the surface through various vessels, we'll say. There is another enemy in Tears of the Kingdom, and other Zelda games, of course, but this is one of the first games where you've gotten to see the likes with a really high amount of detail. One of the other things that I've discovered is the similarity between Gibdo teeth, like teeth, and structures on those Hydra trees as well. It's also really, really interesting to me that the likes produce a stone, the round stones that have that, I guess, webbing, kind of like what you see in the cross sections of Hydra trees when they've been cut down, and the pods that the Gibdos use to spread themselves around, which are also shaped like mushrooms, which is really, really interesting and kind of weird. This got me really thinking about how the likes essentially, if you look at what they're doing and how they operate, they consume something, and then if they are, some of them are elemental. And granted, I don't want to go too far with this because I think it is still a video game, and obviously the reason why fire likes, frost likes, and electric likes exists is because it's a fun game mechanic to create some sort of dynamicism amongst them, right? But at the same time, knowing that the Hydrazoa can actually incorporate the DNA of its prey and evolve itself is really, really neat in this kind of way, if you consider that likes are an extension of whatever this sort of weird life force is at the depths, or unlife force, I guess. Anyhow, the stones that they produce have that same webbing, and they're very elementally charged, and it's kind of made me wonder about the fact that there's some other things in the depths that do something similar. The frogs, for example, producing gemstones on their back, has made me wonder if things like zonite are the byproduct of some of this process in the depths, some sort of an organism that's there. Ultimately, it's really, really hard to know. But when you consider the fact that the webbing that is on the like stones matches that of the Gibdopods, matches that of the cross-section of the Hydra trees, they kind of see the same kind of webbing happening on zonite as well. It's one of those things that makes me wonder. But there's unfortunately just not a whole lot of really good historical background on anything to do with zonite. For all we know, could just be naturally occurring. Ultimately, this has led me to a number of unanswerable questions and one or two observations that give me pause. One such observation is the Hydrazoa can, if you were to cut a Hydrazoa in half, it can actually reform two complete versions of itself. Given that the Gibdo seemed the most prominent in Gerudo areas or areas where Gerudo fighting may have clashed with the kingdom, in Ocarina of Time, this would be the Shadow Temple, where the enemies of the kingdom were mercilessly tortured. We find them very prominently in the ancient prison in the Greater Desert, inside the Lightning Temple, inside the Forgotten Foundation, which is essentially the tail end leading up to the imprisoned chambers, the ruins of the Light Temple, rather. And I started to see the Gerudo influence. I'm like, okay, Twin Rova can split and reform, and has two elemental traits. Like, what if for that? I don't really have enough info to probably go down that rabbit hole, but it's just like an observation / aha of like, what if you were under the influence of the spores of a Hydrozoa, like say we scale up to like human size and humans were susceptible to this, you would probably see human beings operating in a very Hivemind oriented type way. I'm not gonna lie, the sudden mushroom obsession of Hateno Village has kind of like made me go, what if on that one too? Not saying that that's true or that I even believe it, but it's like what if? I've wondered if this is why the miner set has the respirator. Now, naturally, if you're mining anywhere, even in the real world, we have respirators on mining equipment for a reason. And that entire environment is going to be all kinds of things, but from organisms to, if you're working near a mill, a zonite quarry mill, then you're going to probably be dealing with micronized rock dust as well as micronized zonite, and who even knows the kind of problems that will come with that. But I wondered if the respirator on the miner set could be a spore protection thing as well. So it's just another rain of thought. And then the trees at the top of these Hydra trees have this interesting structure. Earlier I referred to them kind of like a makeshift spino column. But if you notice, like all the way at the top, they have this kind of like bulb. This is present somewhere else in the Air of the Wilds. Actually, it is also present in a place in the past too. But I think like this is the big one, which is if you look at the shape on top of Impa's hat, it seems like a very interesting reference to this, but possibly. And if you're fairly new to the series, something that is worth consideration here. All the way back after Skyward Sword, but before the founding of the kingdom, the Dark Tribe was banished to the Twilight Realm. They're called the Dark Tribe, and in English they're referred to as the Interlopers. That's totally an invention of Nintendo of America, but they're the Dark Tribe. And in the Japanese text for like Ocarina of Time and several other games, the Sheikah are directly referred to as the Dark Tribe. So when seeing that on Impa's hat, I'm like, So to wrap up here, one of the things that I found really interesting in Masterworks is when the Dying Zonai came to the surface, or returned to the surface, one of the first things that they did is sealed up all of the chasms, so they existed that far back. But it doesn't say why, except to say that kind of like, almost like the veil of between the depths and the surface should never really be pierced. And there could be a number of reasons for that are anything from the sealing of past demons, it being a potential predecessor of the demon world. If you haven't seen it yet, Monster Maze has a video about this where he predicted potentially that the depths were based on Ne no Kuni and Yomi no Kuni and the Land of Roots in Shinto myth. And it could just be something related to that, because if it is with that, that actually got confirmed, of course, in Masterworks, that is the basis for the depths. And if it could just be as simple as it's a spirit world thing and that's just their spiritual beliefs coming out, you could also have no explanation at all. You don't know. But I do wonder about that. I wonder about the fact that when they came down, they were like, well, let's just close these up. Anyway, I hope that you enjoyed hanging out with me while we reviewed this. If you found this particularly an infectious topic, I'd love for you to spread your thoughts in the comments. Take care, y'all. Till next time.